It can't be bargained with. It can't be reasoned with. It doesn't feel pity or remorse or fear. And it absolutely will not stop. Ever. Until you are dead.
So there's this weird prevailing idea that over the course of time, it's cool and it's kind of in vogue now to go and trash people even after they've died. People have been very influential, obviously, within the comic book industry. Probably nobody has been more influential than Stan Lee. And over the last few years, certainly since his passing, there have been a lot of people that have wanted to kind of tarnish his legacy, try to take away some of his accomplishments. A lot of things. There's certainly been debate going on about Stan Lee and whether he created all the things that he said he did for quite some time. But we are getting another hit piece from Abraham Reisman. He did a piece in Vulture in 2016. He's basically expanding on that. He's writing a book called True Believer, The Rise and Fall of Stan Lee. And I'm going to talk a little bit about it today and some of the details and some of the things I think that he's missing, even with his own quotes and things that he has, at least in the initial story. And here with me to talk about that is El Percherino himself. Perch, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. And I'm disappointed though. This kind of story, I always hate to see it.
It's so weird. I think that the newer generations, probably some people in our generation, like to look at historical figures through the lens of today, as if the norms of today should have been the norms 100 years ago, and maybe they should have been, but they weren't. And they'd like to attribute things to historical figures. That's certainly happening to Stan Lee. What's interesting in the article, I went back and read it. There's a quote, and it's Stan Lee. He's being funny. He's trying to be self-effacing, where he's talking about a business part. He says, he does all the talking. The girls love him because he's good looking, and he just keeps me around. And why do you keep me around? I haven't figured that out yet. No, he's great to work with. He does all the work, and I take all the credit.
Yeah.
And Abraham Reisman took that as like a smoking gun. He's basically laughing about how he screwed over Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko and some other creators who have made claims that maybe Stan Lee wasn't the creative mastermind that he was over the years. What's interesting, he does provide a lot of information, but there's no smoking gun here. It's all he said, she said. Stan Lee says, I created the Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, I created all these characters. And Steve Ditko and Jack Kirby said, no, I created them.
Yeah.
But there's no third party that was there to witness it that can specifically state who actually was the creator.
No, there's not. I mean, this book and this article and kind of the angle it's going for is just firmly in the camp of the artists Kirby and Ditko and others made these characters, and Stan Lee kind of leached onto it for credit. But kind of like you said, first off, none of this is particularly new information. We've heard about the Stan Lee and Kirby feud and with Steve Ditko as well. We've heard about this for years. This is not new. What this does is kind of just pour more gasoline on the fire. It takes those things and it exaggerates it further. Really, from every little piece we've seen, little clips we've seen from the book, it's inserting more words. It's talking, Stan Lee wisecracks about his own claims of responsibility. He goes up against an embittered Steve Ditko. There's a lot of additional words that are put in here, all negative and manipulative with Stan Lee, and all kind of in a victim way with the artists. And for the record, I mean, I do think that there was a period of time, clearly, where Stan Lee took more credit than he deserved, in the sense of it was more of his show, it was more of his thing. But again, we've covered this. We've covered this for 20 to 30 years. This is well-worn material, and it's disappointing to see it back.
And really, the nexus of kind of a lot of this is this article that came out in 1966 from Nat Freeland in the New York Herald called "Superheroes with Super Problems," and basically he went into Marvel Comics. He wanted to see how the sausage was made, and then you had a very outspoken, verbose Stan Lee giving the tour, telling him about the Marvel method and explaining how, I'm writing 12 comics a month right now. This is how it's done. And then you had Jack Kirby over there as, the grizzled foreman, I think is kind of the way they described him. And I guess that really hurt Jack Kirby's feelings, that it felt like Nat Freeland was giving Stan Lee all the credit for being the creative mastermind. Now, Stan Lee did not write that article. He didn't pay Nat Friedland to write that article. He came in and saw Marvel Studios. Jack Kirby obviously is more of an introvert, whereas Stan Lee was more extrovert. Of course, he was going to latch on to him as, you know, essentially the carnival barker guy. Of course, he's the guy behind all the magic.
Sure. I mean, the frustrating part in all this is any company, you've got PR people, you have marketing people, which is really a lot of what role Stan Lee played. And those are the ones that go out in front of the cameras. Those are the ones that get the attention. It's true for car companies and medicine companies and tech companies and anything. You have those people who are out as the public face of the company. Does that not mean that there's really hard workers, maybe the, you know, quote unquote brains of the operation are somewhere deeper in the company? Always.
Do I think Elon Musk is the one that's doing all the nuts and bolts and the engineering work on his SpaceX program?
Absolutely. No. Bill Gates did not sit at a desk and write Windows 95. No, I mean, none of these people typically did. And people know this. And so, I mean, the problem with this is you get why they're doing this book. The idea is hey, here's an American icon. Here's a friendly face. We love it when we see him pop up in these Marvel movies that are making $1 billion for just a couple seconds. And it's a Stan Lee cameo. And he seems like just a friendly guy, but really deep down, he was a manipulative, you know, jerk who was shamelessly taking the credit of other people. He was the supervillain of the comic story. And I'm tired of that deconstruction story. You know, anyone with a brain knows that Jack Kirby was a genius and did a great job and really was amazing in everything that he did. Same thing with Ditko and all these people. And everybody also is aware that Stan Lee was the carnival barker, took a lot of credit for this stuff. And where the exact line, you know, whose brain did the idea for Spider-Man pop out of first, you know, and where exactly did that origin form? It's an interesting question, but we don't need a tell-all book about how Stan Lee was a creep, you know, to solve that. And the book is not going to solve that either. Like you said, this is all just kind of he said, she said. It's really designed to say, you know, Stan Lee, the guy you thought you really loved, just was a manipulative a-hole who took credit for other people. And I don't see the point.
And Stan Lee himself credits Jack Kirby. This is what he said in 1968. Some artists, such as Jack Kirby, need no plot at all. I mean, I just say to Jack, let's let the next villain be Dr. Doom. Or I may not even say that. He may tell me. And then he goes home and does it. He's so good at plots, I'm sure he's 1,000 times better than I am. That's what Stan Lee said about Jack Kirby in 1968. It's not like he never gave the man credit. Now, did Jack Kirby get as much credit as he deserved? No. Did Steve Ditko get the credit that he deserved? No. And this is what Jack Kirby had to say about Stan Lee. He was much less gracious about the whole thing. Stan Lee and I never collaborated on anything. And this was in an interview in 1989. It wasn't possible for a man like Stan Lee to come up with new things or old things for that matter. Stan Lee wasn't a guy that read or that told stories. That is false. He was writing comic books before Jack Kirby got to Marvel.
Yeah, and Jack Kirby did recant a bit of that later. I mean, there's been bitter feelings in this industry with people all the time. And I think if this book was an examination of kind of why that happens in this industry, why you see this disconnect between writers and artists and how it comes about, all that'd be an interesting book. I'd be interested to read that. But for more, I'm not lionizing Stan Lee either. I find it equally ridiculous the people that say that here's this creative genius that did everything. I think that is also insane. That's not the way the business works. So, you know, it's lots of people collaborate on a comic. I think it's undisputed that Jack Kirby did a lot more, like you said, than he was given credit for down the road. And it's nice to see Kirby getting a lot of recognition now. It's nice to see Ditko getting more recognition now. I wish a lot of this would have come when they were alive and they could celebrate themselves. But it is, you know, we do see this constant beat, and there's at least some hint that this book's also going to go into, you know, various other things behind the scenes of how he treated people and maybe different kind of sexist behavior and other things. And I this is just my own opinion. Nobody else has to share it, but why? The man's passed. What possible gain do we have now out of going into all this dirt? It's not going to help anybody. It just continues to drag, you know, icons through the mud for cash. And that seems That seems lame to me.
Well, it's not just Stan Lee either. They're apparently, what is it? The quote. According to Reisman, he also is going to be painting a less than flattering portrait of Stan's wife of 70 years, Joan, and do a pretty big expose, I guess, on his troubled relationship with Stan Lee's daughter, JC.
Yeah.
What does that have to do with his legacy at Marvel Comics?
I mean, this is an industry of it's just a segment of the industry. It's dirt. It's going to take tabloid. Exactly. It's just let's take some people you thought were great, and we're going to drag them through the mud a little bit for your entertainment, and you'll be able to laugh at these people and then go on to the next tell-all book. I don't get it. It's not for me. I'll use a comic industry. This kind of stuff is definitely not for me.
My favorite part of that article, and why I'm being very facetious, is that he really tries to tear Stan Lee for his business ventures after Marvel. After the bankruptcy, Stan Lee kind of he got an agreement where he got paid like $800,000 a year, but he wasn't really with Marvel anymore. He would go do some appearances, so he created a company called Stan Lee Media with someone who was disreputable. It turned out he was a criminal. He had I think he might have embezzled the money in the company and really screwed Stan Lee over. Stan Lee was exonerated. Right. He trusted somebody that he shouldn't have, and then they really trashed him for all the failures of POW Entertainment. Stan Lee, those were his ideas when he was like 80 and 90 years old. How many people's creative peaks go into their 90s outside of Warren Buffett?
I mean, I love this argument of see, when he was later in life and had created some of the most recognizable characters worldwide, then he created some stinker characters. What are people even talking about? Like every idea has to be perfect or the person is a flawed human. That's just this strange. And again, it feels a lot like, hey, the person is dead. We want to use his name to sell some books, and we want to point and laugh at some of the things that didn't work out. I mean,
I imagine that this book is coming out because the article did well. People wanted to go in there and read about some dirt on Stan Lee. And, hey, people are interested in hearing some bad stuff about a pretty darn good person that was a flawed individual, like we all are.
I just, whether you like Stan Lee or don't like Stan Lee, and I think it's fine if you don't care for him, you don't like his style, you didn't care for what he wrote. I mean, that's fine. Nobody has to like everybody. But the idea that then we have to have books that just continue to double down and drag these people through the mud after they're dead feels ghoulish. I don't see the point in it. Even if you dislike Stan Lee, you think he was overrated. You're not. You don't want. Do you really want to read a book about how crappy he and his wife were? It puzzles me.
Yeah. I don't know. I think Jerry Conway said it best. Obviously he worked with Stan Lee, since 1970. This is what Jerry Conway had to say about Stan Lee. This is the closest you get to any confirmation that Stan Lee did anything wrong. Stan's gotten, at least from somebody outside of Ditko and Kirby himself, Stan's gotten far too much credit. People have said that Stan was out for -- and to a very large degree, that's true. He's a good guy. He's just not a great guy.
Sure. Yeah. And that's true of a lot of big public figures like this. I mean, you get out there, some of it's, everybody should be motivated to, try and build their career and hype themselves. Absolutely. That's what you do in business. And definitely there are some people who are not Stan Lee that took these stories and ran with it. That doesn't mean, Stan Lee wasn't pushing that stuff on, but I mean, what are you supposed to do? Should you go out in your career and say, hey, I want to have a good career. I did some good things, but please don't report too favorably on me. Don't give me too much credit. I just kind of give me medium credit for everything. That's all. All this is silly. I don't know. Stan Lee was far from a perfect human being, but we've known that for decades now. So,
well, he's also very far from being the comic industry villain. And as Reisman himself put in that article, the debate over how much credit Lee deserves is the single most controversial matter in the history of comics. I say balderdash to that and balderdash to pretty much that entire article. It was basically nothing unless you wanted it to be something.
I'm with you completely.
Well, thank you very much for joining me today, Perch, talking about this upcoming book that spun out of this Vulture article. Bunch of hogwash, if you ask me.
I completely agree.
If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. I would appreciate it very much. It helps us attract more views for the channel. Subscribe for future commentary, comic book news, and reviews. And don't forget to ring the bell for notifications. If you want to talk comics, movies, and much, much more, you can follow me on Twitter at Wes_from_TC. With that, Salamat Po, and I'm out.